then
10%'s a lot.
okay.
Maybe I could intersect, because the police lead, Osprey Valley as police liaison, and I met with the police chief today, and as of today, we're actually, we're suggesting to the chief a reduced force below the 33 to 32.
And Ray, just so you know, I'm not picking on the police department.
No, it's a good,
I
I
don't,
don't think it's a good target, but it's an opportunity.
just a question.
The other point that's on the assumption sheet is the dispatcher. Right now, we have paid officers, we have 23 paid officers who at some point in a shift during the month rotate through working dispatch and answering the phone. So we have officers making in excess of $80,000 to $100,000 picking up a phone. When obviously the uniformed sworn personnel who would prefer to be out on duty and on patrol, and they've expressed that. What's proposed here is to reduce the overall total staffing, to convert 3 uniformed positions to civilian dispatchers. That accomplishes a couple things. One is, or 3 things. Salary is approximately 1/3 of what the officer gets them out of the PBA union and binding arbitration, and more importantly in terms of the community and the safety and security of our residents, puts the officers where they are trained to be, out on the street, on patrol, with their weapons and with their equipment, instead of answering the phone. So we're going to move to a model of swapping out as positions open up in the police department to try to maintain the body count in terms of the gross number of people, but to move them out of the PBA union, out of binding arbitration, into civilian at 1/3 the cost of salary and 1/10 the pension cost, which is what kills us in the police department in terms of the financial obligations that we've incurred through our contracts. And when you go to binding arbitration, you have a third party who imposes a settlement. And unfortunately, the surrounding towns have been very generous to their PBAs, and that sets the model for your settlement when you go to an arbitrator. And Chatham just settled, for example, for 3.94% and 4.1 for a 3-year contract with their PBA without going to arbitration. We can't afford that. And we also can't afford to go for multi-year contracts. So we're advocating 1-year contracts because our financial position will change from year to year to year. And we're not going to lock in committing ourselves to pay something that we will have difficulty paying in the out years. So we're going to take it 1 year at a time, which will be very painful for everyone here to go through it every year. But I think that's the way our residents are writing out their bills. They live paycheck to paycheck and year to year, and that's how we have to live within our budget and year to year. So on the fire side, they have 14 paid employees. So
I'm sorry, Ray, just to stop you, just while we're on the police. Certainly, I understand and I agree with the idea of adding the dispatchers in place of uniformed officers. I think it makes a lot of sense for all the reasons you've just discussed. I also appreciate the problem we face in any negotiations because of what the other surrounding communities are paying. But at some point, you've got to break that paradigm. If someone doesn't start breaking it, then it'll never get broken. And it would add a cost, a legal cost, but it's something we ought to consider, I think, to start breaking the paradigm. The step increases, the various things that are inherent and embedded in these contracts are costing us a terrific amount of money, and we've got to start someplace.
We agree. We tried to reopen. They refused to reopen, so we met with our labor council, and we're going to start down that road, and we're going to end up, I anticipate, in arbitration with our uniformed services, because we will be polar opposites in terms of bargaining positions.
And I'm just expressing the council hasn't spoken on this. I'm just expressing raising a personal question. But I think everything has to be on the table in these times.
In regard to the fire department, I do want to just touch on that a little bit, because it makes it look as if they've been carved out and we didn't look at them. We did look at them. They have 14 employees. We think they effectively use the personnel to ensure the safety of the community. We looked at comparable departments, but there was a decision made to have a paid fire department. And there's been talk about comparing us to Chatham, and they have 1% increase. Chatham doesn't have a paid fire department. They have a separate garbage charge. They have separate sewer charge. They have a regional library. They do things differently than us. They use their reserve fund collected taxes at 91%. We don't do that to build municipal surplus. So there's been a conscious decision that we want to pay for this type of fire protection. So when we sat down with the fire department and said, if we can't reduce because you're at bare bones staffing, how do we increase revenues? So what we were exploring, and we've met with the volunteer ambulance corps and the fire department, is to move to an EMT model. We have officers in training on their own time, not on overtime, to be trained as emergency medical technicians. Helps us in 2 areas. One, responding to an accident scene, we have better trained personnel in an emergency. The second is Monday to Friday now, we've started to negotiate an agreement with the ambulance squad between 9 to 5, that the fire department will be the backup for the ambulance squad. They're down to a very small group of core volunteers who are aging in place, and our service has always been outstanding, but it's difficult as they get older to maintain that level of service. The fire department will supplement. We don't bill anybody for any of those services. Other towns bill for ambulance services, especially when you have an EMT component. So for our residents, it still would be cash neutral. If you have no insurance and you're unable to pay, you don't pay. If you have insurance and it's a billable item, we will bill insurance. If you're a non-resident and we respond and transport, it will be billable. In Teaneck, Englewood, Hackensack, other towns, they generate $400,000 to $700,000 a year in ambulance trip revenue for transportation, emergency calls, hospital runs, nursing home responses, things of that nature. They're heavier, larger communities with greater volume. We have the potential to raise dollars. So the goal would be is to use the model, get more productivity out of the fire department, and help them self-pay for their costs. But you obviously are the final decision makers. If you want to reduce the size of the fire department, there's 14 people there, and our average fireman's making a decent salary. And that's an opportunity if you were so inclined to reduce.
Thank you, Ray.
I think you'll have those opportunities also, not only one-on-one, and certainly, you know, I should go through the big book here and want to ask those questions of the department heads, but, you know, as we discuss with each department as they go through their budget, I mean, we don't try to go line by line, but certainly things that stick out at you want to ask questions, we'll have that opportunity to do. I know particularly with the fire department, I don't want to defend any one department, but I know they really worked very hard last year to hold the line on their budget, and so they're not looking for particularly any increases other than contractual. But those are things you got to kind of put in a context of a couple of years, so that's worth the conversation with each department head. So, and liaison as they become familiar with it. Okay, there are no other questions? All right, at this time, is there anyone from the public wishing to be heard? You have 3 minutes. Please keep it to 3 minutes this evening. We don't usually open up these meetings to the public, but I figured, Mr. Roth, you'd have a few words you'd like to say. If you'd please come forward. And I know you have 3 minutes.
That was a typo.
That was a typographical error.
I fixed that.
We just made a budget cut on the minutes,
Right.
I'm sorry.
Under fair advertising rules, we would be bound by the 5 minutes.
Thank you. No, actually, it was incorrect. It was re-advertised at 3. So yeah.
As of this afternoon, it was 5. But in any event, I'll try to be brief. I'll try. This preliminary budget, or estimate of a budget, raises a very fundamental question about the public library and what the relationship is between the borough and the library. And the question, as I see it, is the Madison Public Library an important asset and service to the residents of Madison, whose costs and expenses should be measured and weighed against the value of other services provided by the borough to its residents? Or is the library a burden, and the town is required statutorily to fund it in a minimum amount, and is that funding viewed as a burden so that there isn't any examination of the services, the value of those services, but simply we just give it what's required? And that raises the question, you know, another way of saying that is, if there's going to be pain in a budget, and obviously this year has pain, should all the town services share the pain equally or be examined as to where that pain goes? Or do we shift as much burden, much of that pain to the library as the law will allow? And this preliminary budget is pretty clear what it says. It starts off, it's one of its assumptions, that the library will be reduced to the minimum that the law requires it to be given. And as you know, there's no other department, or the health department there's some, but most of the other departments, or the majority of, the great majority of the services provided by the town are not mandated by the state. We provide them because we want to provide them to borough residents.